Tonight, in Chicago, the city that spent $3 billion building underground tunnels to catch its sewage still dumps raw waste into the river every time it rains. As little as 1/3 of an inch. That is all it takes. 1/3 of an inch of rainfall and the system overflows. Toilets and storm drains empty into the same pipes because the sewers were designed before wastewater treatment existed. When those pipes fill up, everything inside them goes directly into the water. In July 2023, a few days of heavy rain sent 3.2 billion gallons of untreated waste into the Chicago River. Researchers found zero dissolved oxygen in sections of the waterway. No life at all. It took 2 weeks for fish to return. Chicago has been building a solution to this problem since 1975. They call it the Deep Tunnel. 109 miles carved through solid rock, 350 feet underground. Reservoirs so massive you could stack 12 Soldier Field stadiums inside one of them. Originally scheduled to finish in 1984, current completion date is 2032, 57 years from start to finish. And here is what nobody talks about. In 1900, Chicago reversed the flow of its river so the sewage would travel away from Lake Michigan. It worked. The waste now flows through the Illinois River into the Mississippi and 1,100 miles south, where it helps create a dead zone the size of New Jersey in the Gulf of Mexico every summer. Chicago solved its pollution problem by making it someone else's problem, and the river still overflows after every heavy rain. To understand how Chicago ended up dumping sewage into its river 125 years after supposedly fixing the problem, you have to understand the geography. Chicago was built on a swamp, a flat, marshy plain at the southwestern edge of Lake Michigan. The land barely rises above the waterline, drainage is almost non-existent, and the same lake that created the swamp also served as the city's drinking water supply. In the mid-1800s, Chicago was the fastest growing city in the world. Population exploded from 30,000 in 1850 to over 1 million by 1890, to more than 2 million by 1910. All those people needed somewhere to put their waste, and the somewhere they chose was the Chicago River. The river flowed naturally into Lake Michigan, so every toilet, every slaughterhouse, every factory dumped its waste into the river, and the river carried it directly into the drinking water. The results were predictable. Typhoid, cholera, dysentery, waterborne diseases killed thousands. The river became so foul that locals called it the Stinking River. By the 1880s, the situation was catastrophic. Chicago tried everything. They razed the entire city, buildings and all, to improve drainage. They extended the water intake further into the lake, hoping to draw cleaner water from deeper out. Nothing worked. The sewage kept reaching the drinking supply. In 1885, a massive storm flushed so much waste into the lake that it contaminated the water intake and triggered a public health emergency. Something had to change. Here is where it gets interesting. A city engineer named Ellis Chesbrough proposed an idea so audacious it seemed impossible. If the river was carrying sewage into the lake, reverse the river. Make it flow backward, send the waste away from Lake Michigan instead of into it. In 1889, the Illinois legislature created the Sanitary District of Chicago with one mission: build a canal deep enough and wide enough to reverse the flow of the Chicago River permanently. What followed was one of the largest earth-moving projects in human history. Workers dug a 28-mile channel connecting the Chicago River to the Des Plaines River, which flows toward the Mississippi. They excavated millions of cubic yards of rock and earth. The techniques they developed would later be used to build the Panama Canal. The project took 8 years, and on January 2nd, 1900, in the dead of night, workers blasted open the final dam holding back the water. They did it secretly, in darkness, because the city of St. Louis had filed a lawsuit to stop them. St. Louis understood exactly what reversing the Chicago River meant. It meant Chicago's sewage would now flow toward them instead of into Lake Michigan. By morning, the river was flowing backward. Water that had always drained into the lake was now draining toward the Mississippi. Chicago's drinking supply was saved. The typhoid rates dropped almost immediately. St. Louis took the case all the way to the Supreme Court. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes ruled in Chicago's favor. His reasoning was remarkable. The Mississippi River was already so polluted from other cities along its banks that Chicago's contribution made little measurable difference. The stink, Holmes essentially argued, was already there. The American Society of Civil Engineers later named the reversal one of the 7 wonders of American engineering. In 1999, they called it a civil engineering monument of the millennium. Chicago had done the impossible. They made a river flow backward to save themselves. But here is what nobody celebrates. The fundamental design of the sewer system did not change. The pipes that carried sewage still carried stormwater in the same channels. This is called a combined sewer system. It made sense in an era before wastewater treatment existed. Why build 2 sets of pipes when everything is going to the same place anyway? In the early 1900s, the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District built intercepting sewers to redirect the combined flow to new wastewater treatment plants. On dry days, the system works beautifully. The sewage gets captured, treated, and released. The river stays clean. On wet days, the math breaks down. A combined sewer system can only hold so much. When rain fills the pipes beyond their capacity, the excess has to go somewhere, and the somewhere it goes is directly into the river, the same river that now flows away from the lake and toward the Mississippi. The reversal solved the drinking water crisis. It did not solve the sewage crisis. It just changed the destination. Instead of contaminating Chicago's water supply, the overflows now contaminate the river, the Illinois waterway, and ultimately the Gulf of Mexico. Every engineering triumph Chicago celebrates, the reversal, the deep tunnel, the massive reservoirs, is a patch on top of a system designed 150 years ago when the solution to pollution was dilution. And every heavy rainstorm reveals that the patches are not enough. Now, let us talk about what actually happens when it rains in Chicago, because the numbers are alarming. The Metropolitan Water Reclamation District operates the sewer system for Greater Chicago. They have the capacity to treat 1.4 billion gallons of wastewater per day across 3 main treatment plants. On a dry day, that is more than enough. The system captures the sewage, processes it, and discharges treated water back into the waterways. No problem. But Chicago does not have dry days all year, and research shows that as little as 0.3 inches of rain, depending on location and intensity, can trigger a combined sewer overflow somewhere in the system. 1/3 of an inch. That is a light rain. That is a spring drizzle. And it is enough to overwhelm pipes that were designed to handle both sewage and stormwater in the same channel. When an overflow occurs, the excess has to go somewhere. Chicago has more than 300 outfalls that discharge directly into the Chicago River and the Little Calumet River. The city of Chicago alone owns 184 of them, more than any other municipality in the region. Each one is a release valve. When the pressure in the system exceeds capacity, those outfalls open and dump whatever is in the pipes straight into the water. Here is what flows out during an overflow. Raw human sewage from homes and apartments, industrial wastewater from businesses, pharmaceuticals that people flush down their toilets, oil and gasoline that drip from cars onto streets, road salt from winter treatments, pesticides and fertilizers from lawns, plastic wrappers and bottles and bags that wash off pavement into storm drains. All of it mixes together in the same pipes. All of it comes out together when those pipes overflow. In July 2023, Chicago experienced what happens when heavy rain pushes the system beyond its limits. A few days of sustained rainfall overwhelmed the infrastructure. Pumping stations activated to prevent flooding and redirected untreated wastewater directly into the river. By the time the rain stopped, 12.3 billion liters of combined sewage and stormwater had been dumped into the Chicago River. That is 3.25 billion gallons. Researchers from Shed Aquarium went to survey a section of the river called Bubbly Creek the day after the pumping station shut off. What they found was disturbing. Dissolved oxygen in the water had dropped to zero. Not low, zero. Aquatic life cannot survive without dissolved oxygen. The researchers found no fish, no movement, nothing. Just trash floating on the surface and water that could not sustain life. It took approximately 2 weeks for fish to return to that section of the river. A 2025 study published in Knowledge and Management of Aquatic Ecosystems confirmed that the overflow had caused significant shifts in zooplankton populations. Some species nearly disappeared entirely, others increased dramatically. The entire food web was disrupted by a few days of rain, and 2023 was not even the worst year on record. In May 2020, Chicago experienced the wettest May ever recorded according to the National Weather Service. The sewer system was overwhelmed for 11 consecutive days. Flash floods created hazardous conditions across the metropolitan area. And something happened that is not supposed to be possible anymore. The Chicago River temporarily reversed its flow back toward Lake Michigan. The whole point of the 1900 reversal was to keep sewage out of the lake permanently. The system uses locks and control structures to maintain the backward flow. But in May 2020, the volume of water was so extreme that sewage reached the cusp of those locks, just a few hundred feet from Lake Michigan. The drinking water supply that Chicago spent a century protecting came dangerously close to contamination from its own waste. The Metropolitan Water Reclamation District sends out notifications called overflow action alerts before heavy rain events. Over 8,000 people are subscribed. The alerts ask residents to conserve water during storms, limit showers, delay running the dishwasher, avoid doing laundry. Every gallon that does not enter the sewer system is a gallon that does not contribute to an overflow. Here is the number that should concern you. Even on days without overflows, the Chicago River receives 1.2 billion gallons of treated effluent daily. This water has been processed through the reclamation plants. It is not raw sewage, but it is also not fully clean. Nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus remain in the water even after treatment. Pharmaceuticals pass through. Microplastics pass through. The treatment removes the worst contaminants, but not everything. And then there is the trash. The MWRD operates skimmer boats that patrol the river collecting debris. In 2023, they pulled 675 tons of garbage from the water. On average, they collect about 745 tons per year. Between 75% and 95% of what they collect is plastic. A professor at Loyola University named Tim Hoeline has been studying the composition of river trash for years. His team confirms that 85% of the garbage collected is consumer-based plastic. Of that, a huge percentage is food-related. Water bottles, chip bags, styrofoam takeout containers, coffee cups, plastic wrappers. These items blow off streets, wash through storm drains, and end up floating in the river. The director of the nonprofit Friends of the Chicago River describes how the nature of the trash has changed over the decades. It is no longer the dumping ground it was. In previous generations, cleanup crews pulled shopping carts and sofas and tires and old pipes from the water, large objects that people deliberately discarded. That was big and messy, but it was visible. Today, the trash is different, smaller, food-related, plastic. And because it is plastic, it does not decompose. It breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces that never truly go away. The styrofoam crumbles, the wrappers fragment, and the resulting microplastics spread throughout the water column, accumulating in sediment and entering the food chain. In 2023, the first trash trap was deployed in the main stem of the Chicago River near the Michigan Avenue Bridge. It works like a floating garbage can, drawing in water and debris from the surface and trapping litter inside while pumping the filtered water back out. Among the items collected in the first months, a shoe, countless Dorito bags, styrofoam in quantities that researchers called astounding, and a plastic toy dinosaur that became the unofficial mascot of the project. They named him Trappy. Chicago has known about this problem for half a century, and they have been building a solution since 1975. In 1967, the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District convened something called the Flood Control Coordinating Committee. Their job was to figure out how to stop the combined sewer overflows that were polluting the river and flooding basements across the metropolitan area. The committee reviewed more than 50 different approaches. They considered the most obvious solution first. Replace the combined sewers with separate systems, one pipe for sewage and one pipe for stormwater, like modern cities build today. The answer came back quickly. Too expensive, too disruptive. You would have to tear up every street in Chicago, dig under every building, relocate every utility line. The cost would be astronomical, and the construction would paralyze the city for decades. Separate sewers were not going to happen, so they chose something else. Something that had never been attempted at this scale anywhere in the world. They would build a second sewer system underneath the first one, not to replace the combined sewers, but to catch their overflow. Miles of massive tunnels carved through solid rock, hundreds of feet below the surface. Reservoirs the size of small lakes to hold the excess until the treatment plants could process it. They called it the Tunnel and Reservoir Plan. Everyone else calls it the Deep Tunnel. Construction began in 1975. The original completion date was 1984. That date passed. The project kept going. The engineering is staggering. Phase 1 consisted of 109 miles of tunnels bored through the dolomite limestone that sits beneath Chicago. The tunnels range from 9 feet to 33 feet in diameter. The largest sections run 350 feet underground. Workers used tunnel boring machines so massive that the technology they developed was later adapted for the English Channel Tunnel connecting Britain and France. The tunnels themselves can hold 2.3 billion gallons of combined sewage and stormwater while awaiting treatment. When a storm hits and the street-level sewers start to overflow, drop shafts redirect the excess down into the deep tunnels. The water collects there, held in the darkness underground, until the reclamation plants have capacity to pump it back up and treat it. Phase 1 was completed in 2006, 31 years after construction began. Phase 2 is the reservoirs. These are not tanks. They are repurposed limestone quarries, massive open pits carved into the bedrock over decades of commercial mining. The MDRD partnered with the quarry operators in a deal that benefits both sides. The quarries keep mining and selling stone. When a section is exhausted, it gets converted into a reservoir. The dimensions are almost impossible to visualize. The Gloria Alito-Majewski Reservoir near O'Hare Airport was completed in 1998. It holds 350 million gallons. The Thornton Composite Reservoir was completed in 2015. It holds 7.9 billion gallons. You could stack 12 Soldier Field stadiums inside it and still have room left over. Stage 1 of the McCook Reservoir was completed in 2017. It holds 3.5 billion gallons. Stage 2 is currently under construction and will add another 6.5 billion gallons, for a total of 10 billion gallons at that single site. When McCook is finished, it will be the largest combined sewage reservoir of its kind in the world. The current system has a capacity of more than 11 billion gallons. When everything is complete, the total will reach 17.5 to 20 billion gallons. That works out to roughly 4,600 gallons of storage for every person in the service area. The results have been significant. Before the tunnels came online, combined sewer overflows occurred an average of 100 days per year. After the tunnel system became operational in 2006, that number dropped to approximately 50 days per year. The Thornton Reservoir has completely eliminated overflows in its service area since 2020. In its first 3 years of operation, McCook Stage 1 captured over 121 billion gallons of water that would otherwise have flooded basements or polluted waterways. The fish are coming back. In the 1970s, fewer than 10 species could survive in the Chicago River. Today, there are more than 70 species documented. A 2025 study found that 24 species are now actively spawning in the river, including largemouth bass, bluegill, and black crappie. Researchers even detected brook silverside and mimic shiner, species that are considered pollution intolerant. Their presence suggests the water quality has genuinely improved. Beavers have returned.
American mink have been spotted. A large snapping turtle nicknamed Chonkosaurus went viral on social media. In September 2025, 500 people swam in the river for the first time in nearly a century. But here is the number that matters. The deep tunnel was supposed to be finished in 1984. The current estimated completion date for McCook Stage 2 is December 31st, 2032. That is 57 years from start to finish. An infrastructure project that will take longer than most human lifetimes. If you are still here, you now understand why a city can spend $3 billion on underground tunnels and still dump raw sewage into its river after every heavy storm. Comment 2 below if you are following this investigation, and if you have not subscribed, please kindly do so and turn on the bell notification so you do not miss what comes next. Your support helps us keep exposing the infrastructure failures that officials would rather not discuss. Now let us talk about where Chicago's pollution goes after it leaves the city, and why a dead zone the size of New Jersey forms in the Gulf of Mexico every summer. The delay is not due to engineering problems, it is due to economics. The reservoirs are carved from active commercial quarries. The timeline depends on how quickly the quarry operators can mine out the remaining stone. Demand for construction aggregate has slowed in recent years. Less demand means slower mining. Slower mining means slower reservoir completion. The MWRD cannot control the market for crushed limestone, and even when the system is complete, it will not be enough for every storm. The deep tunnel was designed for typical rainfall patterns. Climate change is bringing heavier precipitation to the Midwest. Storms that would have been rare a generation ago are becoming more frequent. When the tunnels and reservoirs fill completely and rain keeps falling, the system has no choice. The sewers overflow to the river, just like they did before the project began. The deep tunnel has captured over 1 trillion gallons of combined sewage since 1981. That is a genuine achievement. The river is cleaner than it has been in over a century. But 57 years and $3 billion later, the fundamental problem remains. When it rains hard enough, raw sewage still hits the water. Now let us talk about where Chicago's pollution goes after it leaves the city, because the story does not end at the river. When Chicago reversed its river in 2900, the sewage had to flow somewhere. The engineers designed the system to drain into the Des Plaines River, which flows into the Illinois River, which flows into the Mississippi River, which empties into the Gulf of Mexico. Chicago's waste now travels 1,100 miles from Lake Michigan to the Louisiana coast. Out of sight, out of mind. Someone else's problem. Every summer, something happens off the coast of Louisiana and Texas. A massive area of the Gulf of Mexico becomes so depleted of oxygen that almost nothing can survive there. Scientists call it hypoxia. Everyone else calls it the dead zone. In 2024, researchers measured the dead zone at 6,705 square miles. That is roughly the size of New Jersey. 4 million acres of ocean habitat where fish cannot breathe, shrimp cannot survive, and anything too slow to swim away simply dies. It is the 12th largest dead zone recorded in 38 years of measurement. Here is how it forms. Nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus flow down the Mississippi River and empty into the Gulf. These nutrients act as fertilizer for algae. The algae bloom explosively in the warm surface waters. When the algae die, they sink to the bottom. Bacteria decompose the dead algae and consume oxygen in the process. The oxygen levels drop so low that the bottom waters become uninhabitable. Mobile fish flee to other areas. Crabs, worms, and shellfish that cannot escape suffocate. The nutrients come from across the entire Mississippi River basin, which drains 41% of the continental United States. Fertilizer runoff from farms in Iowa, Illinois, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. Sewage effluent from cities along the river. Lawn chemicals from suburban neighborhoods. Animal waste from feedlots. Everything flows downhill and downstream, accumulating as it goes. Agricultural sources contribute more than 70% of the nitrogen and phosphorus load. Urban sources contribute roughly 9 to 12%. But here is where Chicago comes in. The Stickney Water Reclamation Plant handles the waste of 2.3 million people in Chicago and the Cook County suburbs. It is the single largest point source of phosphorus pollution in the entire Mississippi River watershed. Not the largest category, the largest single source. One treatment plant in Chicago contributes more phosphorus to the Gulf Dead Zone than any other individual facility in the region. The economic cost is substantial. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration estimates that the dead zone costs U.S. seafood and tourism industries $82 million per year. The Gulf supplies 72% of American harvested shrimp and 66% of harvested oysters. Louisiana is second only to Alaska in total seafood production. When oxygen levels drop, shrimp and fish alter their behavior, change their feeding patterns, and produce fewer offspring. The fishing industry loses catch and efficiency. The costs ripple through coastal communities that depend on the Gulf for their livelihoods. In 1997, the EPA created the Mississippi River Gulf of Mexico Watershed Nutrient Task Force. Their goal was to reduce the dead zone to a 5-year average of 1,900 square miles. They issued action plans in 2001, 2008, 2013, and 2015. Nearly 30 years of task forces and strategy documents. The 2024 dead zone was still 6,705 square miles, more than 3.5 times the target. A researcher from the Natural Resources Defense Council made an observation about why Chicagoans do not think about this problem. The water is going the other way. We do not interact with the water we are shooting towards St. Louis and the Gulf of Mexico. If we are not bathing in it, not going to the beach in it, certainly not drinking it, there is less awareness. Chicago solved its drinking water crisis in 2900 by sending the pollution downstream. 125 years later, the pollution is still flowing in the same direction. The dead zone is still forming every summer, and the solution to pollution is still dilution. Here is the paradox. Chicago lives with every day. The river is at its cleanest levels on record. More than 80 species of fish are thriving. 24 species are actively spawning. Beavers and mink have returned. In September 2025, people swam in the water for the first time in nearly a century. By almost every measure, the Chicago River is a success story, and every heavy rainstorm, raw sewage still flows into it. In April 2024, the Illinois EPA issued a new discharge permit for the city of Chicago. It is the most stringent permit the river system has ever had. The city must now monitor its 11 most active outfalls more closely. 10 of those outfalls near parks and boat launches have been designated as sensitive areas, requiring extra oversight. Chicago must purchase litter control technology like skimmer boats and trash traps. They must update their green infrastructure strategy with measurable goals for reducing stormwater runoff. These are real improvements. They represent decades of advocacy by groups like Friends of the Chicago River, finally producing accountability. But they are also an acknowledgement that the problem is not solved. The deep tunnel will eventually hold 17.5 billion gallons. It will not be enough for the storms that climate change is bringing. The treatment plants will keep discharging 1.2 billion gallons of effluent daily. The nutrients will keep flowing toward the Gulf. The dead zone will keep forming every summer. In 1900, Chicago made a river flow backward to save itself. The engineering was brilliant. The execution was audacious. And the underlying logic was simple. Send the problem somewhere else. 125 years later, the somewhere else is a dead zone the size of New Jersey. The fish are back in Chicago. The fish are dying in the Gulf. The solution to pollution was never really a solution. It was a transfer. After every rain,